Can you be quiet and let the professional speak? The words sliced through the dusty construction site like a whip. All eyes turned to Jamal Carter, a black man in a faded uniform, his hands still marked with concrete dust. The man who had just spoken. Marcus Ellison, the chief engineer, smirked as if he had delivered a final blow. We don't pay construction workers to think, just to follow orders. Silence, then forced laughter. Not because it was funny, because no one wanted to be next. Jamal didn't flinch. Didn't respond. He simply folded the blueprint in front of him with quiet precision. The same blueprint Marcus had just mocked. But what no one knew was this. The worker they had just humiliated wasn't a worker at all. He was the CEO of the entire company. And with one text, just 11 characters. The first domino began to fall. By the time the sun dipped behind the site's skeletal framework, the man who mocked him would be standing in front of everyone, exposed, stripped of power and begging for mercy. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The Eaglestone construction site stretched across several city blocks, a mix of rising steel beams and freshly poured concrete. Among the sea of workers, Jamal Carter moved without ceremony. He carried buckets, double-checked rebar positioning, and wiped sweat from his brow, like every other man there. No one suspected him of being anything more than a seasoned crew member, respected for his work ethic, perhaps, but easily overlooked. Jamal never demanded attention, he earned it. Each morning he arrived before the first foreman and left after the last nail was hammered. He shared his lunch with the newcomers and helped adjust scaffolding for older workers struggling with their knees. Even when someone spilled coffee on his shirt or accidentally knocked over his bag, he responded with nothing more than a soft smile or a nod. Despite this humility, those closest to him sensed there was more to Jamal. His eyes lingered too long on structural flaws. He asked too many precise questions. And he carried with him an old, worn Nokia 3310 phone, a relic in the age of smartphones. When asked why, he'd shrug and say, "Old habits die hard." The workers around him called him OG, short for old guy, but also out of quiet reverence. No one knew where he came from, only that he never bragged and never broke a promise. If Jamal said a wall would be up by noon, it was up by noon. If he mentioned a misalignment in the rebar grid, he was always right, whether anyone listened or not. And it wasn't just the workers who noticed. Greg Mitchell, the senior structural engineer, had watched Jamal with a mixture of curiosity and guilt. He'd once pulled him aside and said, "You know more than you let on." Jamal had simply replied, "Knowing more hasn't helped many men who look like me." Greg hadn't responded. He couldn't. The truth in those words was too sharp. At home, Jamal's life was just as unassuming. He lived alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city with a view of the rail tracks and a kitchen that still smelled faintly of cedarwood. There were no luxury cars in his garage, no assistants or chauffeurs waiting outside. He drove a battered silver sedan, the kind that blended in without question. His evenings were filled with books, engineering manuals, leadership biographies, and historical accounts of companies that had risen and fallen through the decades. On the wall above his desk hung a single frame, a photo of a younger Jamal standing with 5 other men beside the foundation of what would one day become Eaglestone Constructions. They were all covered in cement, beaming like children after a victory. That photo was the only hint of the truth. Jamal had once been the heartbeat of the company, its visionary, its relentless builder. But after years at the top, something had shifted. He saw cracks, not just in foundations, but in culture. Arrogance was replacing integrity. Power was replacing merit. And so without announcement or ceremony, he stepped down from daily operations. Not as a resignation, but as a strategy. To see what Eaglestone had truly become, he had to see it from the ground up. That's why he returned in a worn-out uniform. Why he chose a hard hat over a boardroom chair. Why he picked the name Jamal Carter again and not Thomas Jamal Carter. Morgan, the name etched into every legal document, every blueprint header, every contract signed in the last decade. Undercover, he observed everything. He watched as safety protocols were skipped to meet timelines, as newer engineers hesitated to report problems, as foremen prioritized convenience over quality. And worst of all, he watched men like Marcus Ellison, the kind who looked polished on the surface, but hid rot underneath, rise through the ranks unchallenged. Jamal could have intervened sooner, but he knew timing was everything, so he waited. He let Marcus mock him. He let others laugh along. And when Marcus sneered, Maybe I should hand him my Stanford degree. Jamal knew the moment had come. That day during the meeting, Jamal didn't just hear Marcus, he studied him. The way he dominated conversations, the way he dismissed objections, the way he weaponized his title like a club. But what Marcus didn't know was that Jamal had already been documenting each flaw in the foundation design, photographed each safety violation, logged each altered report copied, and that phone in his pocket. It wasn't just old, it was untraceable. And its last message, KT3P15, callback wasn't random. It was a code, a trigger. Because Jamal had a team of silent watchers, internal auditors, off-site project consultants, even two legal analysts who had been secretly compiling data. For weeks they had been preparing, waiting for the final confirmation. And today Marcus gave it. So when Jamal left the meeting and stepped outside into the dusty sun, he wasn't walking away in defeat. He was walking toward justice. The question now wasn't if Marcus Ellison would fall. It was how hard and how many would watch. By 2:14 p.m., the sun hovered mercilessly above the Eaglestone construction site, turning steel beams into scorching rails and asphalt into shimmering glass. Inside the makeshift meeting tent set up for a surprise engineering review, Marcus Ellison stood at the front, arms folded like a general before battle, his tone sharp, his eyes ruthless. "Can we please get back to professional voices?" he snapped. Jamal stood in the back row, silent. Dust clung to his uniform and sweat dripped from his temples, but his posture never shifted. He didn't react to the laughter that followed Marcus's insult. Not when Marcus scoffed at his soil slope warning. Not when someone muttered, "Stick to the shovel," under their breath. Not even when the blueprint Jamal had marked earlier was taken from his hands and shoved aside. He simply stood listening. Greg Mitchell, the most senior engineer present, rubbed his temple uncomfortably. He had reviewed Jamal's soil analysis earlier that week, and deep down he knew it held weight. But this wasn't about facts. It was about hierarchy. And in this tent, Marcus was king. "We've got deadlines, investors breathing down our necks. I don't have time to entertain fantasies from a guy who lays bricks," Marcus snapped, waving his laser pointer across the screen. "Next topic," the words echoed through the tent like a closing gavel. No one objected, no one even looked Jamal's way. Public silence was contagious. Outside, a light breeze rustled the hanging cables, carrying the sound of jackhammers and cranes across the yard. But inside the tent, the silence after Marcus's comment was suffocating. Engineers flipped their notepads. Junior staff stared at their boots. Interns tried not to make eye contact with Jamal. That's when Marcus made it worse. He turned deliberately and walked over to Jamal, extending his hand mockingly. "Hey, Carter, maybe next time you can brief us on quantum mechanics. I hear you also worked in rocket science before showing up here, right?" Jamal looked at the outstretched hand but didn't take it. He didn't flinch either. Instead, he studied Marcus the way a sculptor examines a block of stone, measuring the cracks, estimating the weight, calculating how many strikes it would take to bring the whole thing down. That unsettled Marcus. "Nothing to say." Marcus scoffed. Jamal blinked slowly, then said quietly, "Nothing yet." Greg's eyes narrowed. That tone measured cool. Deliberate wasn't the tone of someone who felt powerless. It was the tone of a man choosing patience over revenge, of a man letting others dig their own grave. The next 5 minutes unfolded like a stage play from a satire. Marcus presented a revised schedule for the tower's northeast wing, completely ignoring the terrain report. He bragged about coming in under budget by refining material use. He dismissed a safety concern raised by a young female intern, barely glancing her way. And through it all, Jamal said nothing, but he was watching. Recording every word, every face. Marcus paused only once when his phone vibrated. He glanced down, reading a message he didn't understand. "Arrival 14:45, internal level red." He frowned, thinking it was a system error, then shrugged and moved on. By 2:42 p.m., the tent had grown too warm, too heavy. Even Marcus's arrogance seemed to sweat. He wrapped up with a dramatic, "Let's keep the amateurs out of strategy discussions next time," and dismissed the room. Jamal turned and walked out into the blinding sunlight. It wasn't until he reached the shipping container that served as the site's admin office that his phone buzzed in his pocket. He retrieved the old Nokia and opened the incoming message. "Team ready, eyes on site, standby." Jamal glanced at the watch on his wrist. 2:44 p.m. The first domino was about to fall. Back inside the tent, Marcus grabbed a cold water bottle from the cooler and leaned back with a smirk. "You see that?" he said to Jared, his assistant. Shut him down without raising my voice, Jared smiled weakly, his expression unreadable. You know what pisses me off? Marcus continued, voice louder now that the others were gone. These guys think hard labor gives them insight, that a trowel teaches more than a textbook, like they belong at this table. I built this place. You built what exactly? A voice cut in from the doorway. Everyone turned. Greg Mitchell stepped forward. His tone wasn't angry, just firm. The foundation detail you ignored this morning, it's showing early-stage stress. I just got a call from Aaron on the inspection team. He noticed the shift an hour ago. Marcus straightened. That's not possible. It's already settling. Marcus, Greg said, and Carter was right. Silence. Jamal re-entered the tent at that exact moment, not as a worker, not as a peer, but as a shadow in the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even speak. He just stood there watching, like someone waiting for the building to crack before showing the world the blueprint he'd been holding the entire time. By 2:45 p.m., the sun had started its slow descent, but the heat in the Eaglestone admin trailer had only begun to rise. Marcus Ellison stood stiffly, blinking at Greg Mitchell's words. The foundation's settling. Already, Greg nodded grimly. Northeast quadrant, preliminary tilt indicators show deviation. Aaron Langley flagged it. It's already moved 2 millimeters southward. Marcus opened his mouth, then shut it. He wasn't ready to admit anything. Not yet. 2 millimeters isn't critical yet, Greg said, but that corner was supposed to be load neutral. Now it's drawing tension from lateral slope compression. He held up a folder and dropped it on the center table. Inside was Aaron's field report, timestamped less than 45 minutes ago, and Jamal saw it coming. That name again, Jamal. In the back corner of the room near the admin supplies, Jamal stood with arms crossed. He hadn't spoken since re-entering, but his presence hung in the air like smoke, unavoidable, unspoken, impossible to ignore. The others in the trailer glanced between him and Marcus, unsure whether to speak, whether to listen, or simply stay out of the line of fire. Marcus's assistant, Jared, tried to intervene. Maybe it's just instrumentation drift. We can run another check. No, this time it wasn't Greg or Jared who spoke. It was Jamal. His voice was calm, quiet, but it cut through the air like steel. Through silk, I took a manual reading myself, measured against the primary rebar grid, not just the external markers. Greg raised an eyebrow. You did? Jamal nodded once. The ground underneath the northeast slab isn't stable. There's more clay in the sublayer than indicated in the original geotechnical report. Marcus's face twitched. That's impossible. We ran 3 boreholes in that quadrant. You ran 3, Jamal corrected, but not the 4th, the one recommended by the subsoil consultant. It was cut from the final plan. The silence that followed wasn't the kind that begged for clarification. It was the kind that demanded explanation. Jared shifted uncomfortably. We cut the 4th sample to stay on schedule. It was approved by whom? Greg asked sharply. Marcus didn't answer. He walked to his desk pretending to search for another document, but he knew the silence already spoke louder than any paperwork ever could. Then Jamal stepped forward, not dramatically, not with any theatrics, just purposefully. He placed a USB drive on the center table. What's that? Marcus asked, eyes narrowing. A time-lapse feed of the slab settlement over the past 72 hours, Jamal replied. I patched into the site's secondary camera network, the one no one remembers because it's not tied to our core data log. Marcus turned red. That's unauthorized. That's accountability, Jamal replied. I noticed discrepancies between what was reported and what I saw with my own eyes. So I watched, I waited. I recorded. Greg picked up the drive without hesitation. We'll check it now. Jared hesitated. Are we sure that's Greg? Shot him a look. Plug it in. The drive was inserted into the central operations tablet, and within seconds the trailer's wall screen flickered to life. The footage was grainy but clear. It showed the northeast quadrant, concrete being poured, smooth and marked. Then over the next 48 hours, the faintest shift. A subtle lean shadows where there should have been symmetry. Greg leaned forward. Jesus, it's actually bowing. Marcus's face had gone pale. He could no longer blame bad data or jumpy instruments. This was visual proof, captured by someone he'd ridiculed. Why didn't you report this through the standard chain? Marcus asked, voice suddenly hoarse. Because the chain is broken, Jamal said without hesitation. It punishes truth-tellers and protects the ones who put bonus targets ahead of safety. The room went silent again. But this time the silence wasn't avoidance, it was realization. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but before he could form a word, his phone vibrated violently in his pocket. He pulled it out. Chairman on site, 15 minutes, full audit. Marcus turned ghost white. The air left his lungs. He stared at the screen like it had betrayed him. Jared leaned over. Is that? Marcus nodded. Greg looked between them. Chairman Morgan. Jamal stepped forward, now walking calmly to the center of the room. Not Morgan, he said. Thomas. Jamal Carter. Greg blinked. Wait, what? Jamal reached into his back pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. From it, he retrieved a card, clean, black silver embossed. He placed it on the table beside the USB. Greg picked it up slowly, reading the lettering. Thomas J. Carter, Chairman and CEO, Eaglestone Constructions. Everyone in the room froze. Jared stepped back as if he'd just seen a ghost. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. You're the chairman, he finally whispered. Jamal nodded. And I've spent the past 4 weeks watching how this site treats people who don't wear a title on their chest. Greg's hands trembled slightly as he looked up. All this time, I wanted to know what the foundation of my company really looks like, Jamal said. Turns out it's cracked, and it starts with arrogance. Marcus took a stumbling step backward, like a man who had just realized the ledge beneath his feet had vanished. Outside, a black car pulled through the site's main gate. Inside, the first reckoning had begun. By the time the sleek black car had finished its quiet glide into the site's inner courtyard, a heavy tension had spread across the entire Eaglestone project grounds like dust after a demolition. No announcements were made, no sirens blared, but word traveled faster than concrete dries. The chairman, Thomas Jamal Carter, was not arriving. He had already been here. And the man they dismissed as just a worker had just revealed himself as the very force behind the company's founding brick. Inside the admin trailer, the engineers, site managers, and team leads didn't move. They remained locked in stunned silence like statues caught mid-breath. Watching Thomas Carter, Sir Jamal, stand at the center of the room, without a single ounce of theatrics and yet commanding more authority than a boardroom full of executives. Greg Mitchell broke the silence first. His voice was low but carried weight. How long? Thomas didn't hesitate. 34 days. I arrived 2 days before the Northeast Quadrant. Poor. Jared finally found his voice. You worked alongside the crew. Why? Thomas turned toward him, calm but firm. Because I needed to feel what they feel, see what they see, hear what they're afraid to say. But Jared faltered. You're the chairman. There are safer ways. There are easier ways, Thomas interrupted. Not better ones. He turned to the wall monitor and pointed at the paused footage, showing the settling slab. You all watched that happen in silence, or worse, ignored it. And if I hadn't been here pretending to be beneath you, it would have gone unspoken until someone got hurt. Greg stepped forward cautiously. We didn't know. No, Thomas corrected. You didn't ask. That's the real problem. From outside, voices murmured. News of the reveal had started to ripple across the site. Field workers, delivery coordinators, welders, safety inspectors, they all whispered the same stunned phrase, Jamal's the CEO. In the break area, Rosa from inventory leaned back against the wall. Eyes wide, you mean Jamal? Jamal, from sandwich line duty? Luis the mason shook his head. He carried buckets with me last week. Tyrell the machinist stared at the cement mixer turning slowly under the afternoon sun. He asked me about pressure valves, like he didn't already know. One by one they realized they'd been working beside a ghost, a silent witness. Not someone there to correct them, but to observe the unspoken rot inside the system. Inside the trailer, Thomas pressed a button on his tablet. A fresh report appeared on the large screen. A breakdown of the structural integrity on Quadrant P3, one that had shown anomalies 2 weeks prior. Why wasn't this reported? Thomas asked, scanning the room. The silence was a confession. I signed off on it, Marcus finally admitted, voice hoarse. We were behind on schedule. And you thought speeding up was worth the risk. Thomas didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. A 2-week gain. In exchange for what? A collapse. A lawsuit. A life. I didn't think it was that serious, Marcus muttered, suddenly looking smaller than he had all day. Thomas turned to the others. Did anyone here object? Greg hesitated, then said carefully, Aaron Langley brought it up once. But Marcus overruled, Jared added. I remember he said Aaron was too cautious. Thomas gave a small nod. That's the cost of silence. One man makes the call, and the rest turn down the volume on their conscience. From outside, the murmurs turned into footsteps. Workers were gathering. slowly at first, then in waves. Word of what had happened in the trailer had spread like fire across timber. No official notice, just eyes meeting, eyes and nods of understanding. Inside, Thomas tapped another file. It showed internal communications from Jared's terminal, revealing a troubling thread, unauthorized edits, test results, overwritten. Warning flags dismissed. Jared's face paled. I didn't do that on my own. Thomas's tone was sharper now. You followed instructions from Marcus. Jared nodded. And you didn't report it. Jared's voice faltered. I didn't know who to tell. That's because you were taught not to speak, Thomas said. This entire site has operated under a culture of silence disguised as efficiency, and that silence ends now. The door to the trailer opened. Walter Green entered. The veteran site supervisor had heard everything. His face was lined with dust and sun, but his expression was clear. I just saw 3 workers in the tool depot crying, Walter said plainly. They thought they were going to get fired next time they spoke up. Turns out the man they thought would fire them was the one holding their shovel. Thomas nodded. Bring everyone. Main yard, 15 minutes. Walter didn't ask questions. He left. Thomas turned back to Marcus. You'll join us. Marcus froze. What, you'll stand with me as I announce what's next, Thomas said, and you will not speak unless I ask you to. Marcus's mouth opened, but Thomas cut him off. If there's anything left of your integrity, you'll show up. Then he turned to Greg. I want the blueprints, the concrete test results, and the personnel audit ready. After this address, we'll have a full review of every site Marcus has touched. Greg nodded. Understood. Jared sat quietly defeated, unsure whether to stand or sink. Thomas walked to the door. Before stepping out, he paused. To those who knew the truth and were too afraid to speak. This is your moment. I didn't come here to punish. I came to expose. But exposure is only the beginning. Change comes next. He opened the door. Sunlight poured in like judgment or salvation. Outside, the workers had gathered, and for the first time, the man they once called Jamal would speak not as one of them, but for all of them. Thomas stepped up onto the makeshift wooden platform, a set of scaffolding planks, hastily reinforced by steel bars, and faced the crowd. More than 100 workers stood scattered across the open concrete yard, their orange vests catching the late afternoon light like embers of curiosity and disbelief. Their chatter faded into silence the moment he raised his hand. I am Thomas Jamal Carter, he began. Voice clear, unwavering. The founder and chairman of Eaglestone Constructions. The words dropped like hammers. No dramatic music, no official announcement. Just truth, naked and unflinching. Rosa covered her mouth. Tyrell blinked twice and muttered under his breath. No way. Luis dropped the wrench in his hand. Stunned, that's Jamal. I've been working alongside you for the past month, Thomas continued. No name tag, no rank, no entourage, just a pair of gloves, a lunchbox, and a steel bucket. Because I wanted to see with my own eyes what this company had become. A long silence stretched. A wind passed, rustling blueprints pinned on nearby walls. He looked around, making eye contact with every corner of the crowd. And what I saw was this. Some of you are giving your best every day with heart, discipline, and precision. But I also saw fear. Fear to speak up. Fear to contradict authority. Fear of being humiliated for having an opinion. He paused. That fear ends today. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Marcus stood at the base of the platform, separate from the group, his head, low eyes fixed on the ground. The sweat on his brow had dried into salt stains, but the heat of shame clung to him like an unshakable weight. Let me be very clear, Thomas said, voice lowering but intensifying. Eaglestone Constructions was never meant to be built on arrogance or fear or silence. It was meant to be built on precision, trust, and integrity. One brick, one voice, one soul at a time. He gestured toward the workers, then to the engineers grouped near the trailers. We are a team. If even one voice is ignored, one warning silenced the entire structure. Collapses, not just the building, the company. He turned and pointed to Marcus. Today, our chief engineer made decisions that violated safety, ethics, and trust. He cut corners to meet targets. He ignored technical risks, and worst of all, he demeaned others simply for doing their jobs. Marcus flinched but didn't respond. Thomas looked out over the workers again. But this is not just about Marcus. It's about what we all allowed to happen. Every time we stayed silent, Every time we laughed off a cruel remark, every time we assumed a title was the same as truth, we poured another weak layer into our foundation. Walter Green stepped forward, his grizzled features somber, and handed Thomas a folder. In this folder are the results of an internal audit I commissioned before I even arrived on site. Thomas explained, "These are not guesses, they are facts, signed, documented, time-stamped. And every one of them points to systemic neglect." He held the folder up, then lowered it slowly. "Which is why, starting today, we begin the reformation of Eaglestone Constructions." A hush blanketed the yard. Thomas turned to the audience again. "We are launching the Voice from the Ground initiative. Every worker, regardless of rank, will now have a direct line to report safety concerns, technical anomalies, and ethical violations to a rotating panel, not middle management. And every report will be reviewed within 48 hours. No exceptions." A murmur ran through the crew. Eyebrows raised, heads tilted in disbelief. Some whispered, "He's serious, yes." Thomas affirmed, "We will also launch a mentorship program, not led by executives in suits, but by people who have seen both success and failure, who understand the consequences of arrogance and the value of humility." He paused again, then added, "And yes, that includes Marcus Ellison." The crowd buzzed louder now. Several engineers exchanged glances. Rosa squinted, confused. Tyrell scowled. "He gets to stay." Marcus finally raised his head slowly. "He has resigned from his position," Thomas said firmly, "but he will spend the next 6 months as a volunteer instructor at our Technical Reformation Center. No title, no salary. Just one goal: to teach what happens when pride outweighs protocol." He took a breath. "This is not mercy, it's accountability. Redemption must be earned brick by brick." The crowd quieted. From the back, a young woman, Myra, a new intern, raised her voice timidly. "What about those of us who've been too afraid to speak up? Are we too late?" Thomas looked at her. "No, you're right on time." Applause broke out, tentative at first, then more confident. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Marcus stepped forward slightly, then stopped. He looked at the people he'd once dismissed, the workers he'd mocked with jokes disguised as management. His voice was faint but audible. "I was wrong." No one clapped, but no one heckled him either. They just listened. That was his first punishment and his first grace. Thomas raised his hand one last time. "This company will not be rebuilt with arrogance. It will be rebuilt with attention, with listening, with humility." Then he stepped off the platform. Not a king descending from a throne, but a worker rejoining his crew. And the foundation finally was being poured right. The boardroom that once echoed with power lunches, budget presentations, and architectural milestones now felt more like a courtroom. The long glass table reflected the early morning light seeping through the tall windows, but no one dared to bask in its glow. Instead, every eye in the room was focused on the man at the head, Thomas Jamal Carter. No longer Jamal, the silent worker. No longer a figure in disguise. Today he sat not as a symbol, but as the force of reckoning. Across from him, the remaining senior engineers and division managers shifted uneasily in their seats. Files were open, charts prepared, and an official report projected on the screen behind Thomas. But none of that mattered more than the envelope on the table in front of Marcus Ellison. It was unopened, untouched. Marcus sat rigid, as if any movement would shatter what little pride he had left. His once immaculate appearance was now marked by fatigue. The suit jacket was gone. His collar was slightly wrinkled. He looked smaller, not physically, but morally. "Before we begin," Thomas said, his voice cool and even, "I want to remind everyone of why we are here." He stood slowly and began to walk along the perimeter of the room, his steps deliberate. "We are not here because someone made a technical error. Mistakes happen. We are not even here because of mismanagement. Poor leadership can be corrected." He paused behind Marcus. "We are here because someone believed that their title gave them the right to ignore the warnings of others, to falsify records, to endanger the very people who trusted him." No one spoke. Marcus Ellison, "You have had time to review the charges brought against you. They are not based on opinion. They are not open to interpretation. They are facts documented, corroborated, and cross-verified by the internal audit team." Thomas stepped back to the head of the table and opened the folder in front of him. 17 violations, 4 incidents of document tampering, 2 cases where worker reports were ignored, and 3 where alternate material specifications were approved against protocol. He let the silence settle. Do you deny any of this? Marcus cleared his throat. No, he said quietly. Don't. A few murmurs rose but quickly fell silent under Thomas's gaze. I do want to say something, Marcus continued, his voice cracking slightly. I wasn't trying to endanger anyone. I thought I was protecting the schedule. The profit margins, I thought, that Thomas interrupted gently, is the most dangerous kind of thinking, the kind that starts with I thought and ends with I ignored. Marcus bowed his head. Thomas gestured to a large screen. This, he said, is a visual of the Northeast Foundation design, the one Marcus claimed was optimal. He tapped the tablet and a new slide appeared, cracks forming along the pressure joints. These were discovered by our emergency inspection team 2 nights ago. Had we poured the upper structure based on Marcus's approval, the entire Northeast section could have begun shifting within a year. A gasp echoed from someone in the room. Thomas didn't flinch. That is not speculation. That is mathematical certainty. Gregory Mitchell, seated near the back, leaned forward. I reviewed the data. The margin of error was within a danger zone, and yet every field report was buried. Aaron Langley nodded beside him. I filed 2 of those reports myself. They disappeared from the system. Marcus looked up, stricken. I didn't delete them myself. Assistant Compliance Officer was following your instructions, Thomas said. As shown by email chains retrieved by our IT audit? Marcus froze. There was no escape. I have been quiet, Thomas said, walking again. But now I must speak. He pointed to a brass plaque on the wall. Eaglestone's founding mission etched in fine script. Built on honor, strengthened by trust. This company was built from nothing. No hedge fund, no institutional capital. Just belief. Belief in doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. And Marcus, he turned voice colder. You did the wrong thing while everyone was watching but too afraid to speak. He picked up the envelope. As I told you yesterday, you have 2 choices. Sign the voluntary resignation, return your bonus, and commit to 6 months of service at our training center. Or refuse and face termination in a lawsuit that will likely revoke your engineering license. Marcus didn't reach for the envelope. I'll do it, he said finally. I'll sign. I'll go to the center. Gregory Mitchell closed his notebook softly. Thomas didn't smile. He merely nodded. And when you get there, Marcus, you will teach those students not just how to measure concrete load or identify steel grades. You will teach them what happens when ego replaces ethics. He turned to the rest of the room. Let this be the last time silence buries safety, the last time arrogance drowns accountability. From now on, every voice matters. Then Thomas sat. The meeting was over, but a new standard had just been set. The fallout from the boardroom confrontation reverberated like a controlled demolition across every department of Eaglestone Constructions. While the formal announcement of Marcus Ellison's resignation spread through internal memos, what truly traveled faster than any official notice was the look on his face as he exited the meeting room, stripped not just of title, but of pretense. Thomas Jamal Carter wasted no time. Less than 24 hours after the boardroom verdict, he issued a company-wide bulletin titled Restoring the Foundation. It wasn't filled with corporate fluff or sanitized language. It was a declaration, a war cry for change. We have witnessed firsthand that expertise without integrity is a liability. The message read, from this moment forward, Eaglestone will not just build structures. We will build systems that protect every voice. This begins now at precisely 9:00 a.m. Department heads, site supervisors, and training coordinators were summoned to the 30th floor of the main headquarters. What had once been the executive conference room was now converted into the Equity Review Center. Gone were the mahogany panels and executive lounge chairs. In their place, circular seating, open whiteboards, and name tags without titles. Thomas stood at the center in a navy button-down and rolled sleeves. From now on, he began. No rank will override true. There were no scripts, no pre-approved agendas. Instead, Thomas handed out folders to each division lead. Inside each was a breakdown of their site's whistleblower reports from the past 2 years, most of which had been ignored, unresolved, or quietly removed from records. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. The silence was indictment enough. The goal here, Thomas said, is not punishment. It's purification. The first major reform rolled out was the creation of the Field Integrity Hotline, a 24/7 encrypted communication channel where any employee from apprentice to architect could report safety risks, ethical concerns, or managerial misconduct. Reports would bypass local leadership and be directed to an independent oversight panel composed of external auditors, field engineers, and retired construction veterans. But Thomas knew policies alone weren't enough. Culture had to change. That's why he introduced Ground Up, a pilot leadership development program where supervisors were required to rotate for 30 days each year, working in non-managerial positions, joining workers in scaffolding inspections, material testing, and trench reinforcement. The goal was simple: feel the consequences of your decisions. The resistance was immediate. In one internal group chat, a site manager in Florida complained, "What's next? The CEO wants us to carry bricks to understand gravity." Thomas didn't respond directly. Instead, he released a short internal documentary-style video titled "The View from Below," stitched together from footage collected during his undercover weeks as Jamal. In it, workers shared their stories. One had been reprimanded for reporting an unstable crane. Another, a woman in logistics, was penalized for suggesting safety harness improvements. No voiceover, no narration, just raw honesty. The effect was seismic. A week later, over 70% of employees voluntarily signed up for mentorship from the ground, a reverse mentoring program pairing junior workers with upper-level staff. Participants would shadow each other, learning not just skills, but perspectives. One unexpected result came from a young welder named Ramon Vega, who, after shadowing a senior project coordinator for 5 days, submitted a procedural revision that reduced joint welding waste by 14%. The proposal, normally destined for a supervisor's recycling bin, was now fast-tracked to implementation. Ramon received a performance bonus equivalent to a junior designer's monthly salary, and more importantly, the respect of his entire crew. Meanwhile, the Rebuild Center, Eaglestone's nonprofit training facility, officially reopened with a new mandate to retrain not only disadvantaged youth, but also fallen professionals seeking redemption and leading the charge, Marcus Ellison. Photos of him, once projected behind podiums at engineering symposiums, now hung in Classroom 2A, where he stood with a whiteboard marker in hand, guiding students through load distribution equations, not with arrogance but humility. "I'm not here to pretend the past didn't happen," he told his class. "I'm here because I finally understand how fragile trust is." Back at headquarters, Thomas prepared for his most public initiative yet. He had declined interviews, avoided flashy press coverage, and refused to name-drop the Marcus Ellison incident. But now, with the reforms underway, he knew the industry needed to hear, not just from him, but from the people who made the change possible. At the National Construction Ethics Symposium in Chicago, Thomas walked onto the stage wearing the same boots he wore as Jamal. The spotlight hit his face, but his words focused on others. "This isn't about one man," he said. "It's about the belief that systems can rot quietly if no one listens. We've built tall towers, but how often have we built trust?" He introduced Tyrell, the machinist, who'd once been laughed at for identifying a valve error. He introduced Rosa, the logistics coordinator whose inventory system now formed the core of Eaglestone's supply chain reforms. And yes, he introduced Marcus. No longer a cautionary tale, but a living chapter of accountability. When the session ended, Thomas didn't stay for handshakes or praise. He caught the evening train back to his office, passing construction sites where Eaglestone's banners now bore a new motto: "We don't just build buildings, we build the people who build them." What began as a silent shift within Eaglestone's internal culture erupted into a public firestorm within days. Not because of a press release, not because of some orchestrated PR campaign, but because one video, grainy, unedited, and taken on a worker's old Android phone, captured the moment Marcus Ellison walked out of the main office trailer carrying his cardboard box. No captions, no commentary, just raw footage of a man who had once towered over his colleagues, now passing by, silently as his peers watched. That footage hit TikTok first, uploaded by a logistics coordinator with the caption, "When you finally see justice on a construction site." Within 24 hours, the clip had over 1.8 million views. By the end of the week, it was everywhere: YouTube, Reddit, Twitter, now X. Headlines read, "Top engineer fired by his own worker turned CEO." Eaglestone's undercover boss story isn't just TV, it's real. How a construction CEO exposed systemic arrogance with one message: "Listen." The hashtags went viral. Jamal was the CEO, voice from the ground. We build with respect, cemented in change. What made the moment explode wasn't just the firing, it was how it was handled. The public wasn't used to seeing powerful men held accountable without scandal or spectacle. There were no dramatic firings captured with shouting matches. No lawyer standing outside buildings, just a man being asked to look in the mirror, and another man giving him the dignity of a second path. Thomas Jamal Carter refused interviews at first, but then came The Atlantic. Their investigative team published a 3,000-word profile titled Blueprints and Belief: How One CEO Rebuilt Accountability from the Ground Up. The article traced Thomas's story from his days as a laborer, mixing cement in Brooklyn, to building Eaglestone into a national powerhouse. It quoted internal memos, collected anonymous worker testimonials, and revealed the layers of systemic oversight that had allowed figures like Marcus to thrive unchecked. Public sentiment was overwhelmingly supportive. Comment sections across platforms lit up. This is how you dismantle systemic ego in silence with evidence. He didn't just fire someone, he built a bridge out of broken bricks. Thomas Carter is the CEO every industry needs. But as with all waves, the backlash came too. Some engineering forums criticized Thomas's reforms as emotionally driven, and two, people first for a hard sciences industry. One particularly viral LinkedIn post by a former executive of a rival firm read, "Respect doesn't pour concrete. Deadlines do the backlash." However, only fanned the flames of support. Dozens of blue-collar unions reposted the original video, praising Eaglestone's new mentorship from the Ground Initiative. A union rep from Pittsburgh posted, "About time someone remembered that without us, there is no structure to manage." Late-night hosts joked about the story, Trevor Noah quipped. "Imagine showing up to work and realizing the guy you just mocked over steel specs owns the building and the entire city block." But it wasn't just entertainment. Universities called. Harvard Business School requested Thomas to keynote their leadership ethics conference. MIT invited him to speak to engineering grads about listening at scale. Thomas declined both. He sent Rosa, the logistics lead, who'd once been ignored in safety meetings, to represent Eaglestone. She spoke with such clarity that the Boston Globe headlined, "From Inventory to Integrity: How a Warehouse Manager Schooled Ivy League MBAs." Then came the social copycats. Several companies launched pseudo-undercover campaigns, announcing with flair their own leadership from below initiatives. But none struck the public with the same authenticity, because with Eaglestone the change hadn't been polished, it had been painful. Earned, even regulatory bodies took notice. The National Building Safety Board launched a review of how worker-voiced safety concerns were tracked across the country. A new bipartisan proposal titled the Carter Clause was introduced in Congress, aiming to require all major infrastructure projects to implement anonymous, technical whistleblower portals, monitored independently from management. Thomas never claimed credit. He issued a simple statement: if one man can fall for believing he was above correction, then one company can rise by making listening its foundation. Meanwhile, internal transformations continued. The Voice from the Ground initiative saw its first impact assessment report. 117 safety hazards reported and resolved within 48 hours. 14 design improvements suggested by workers implemented into blueprint revisions. 23 workers promoted after demonstrating solution-based thinking, most without college degrees. But perhaps the most powerful shift wasn't structural, it was cultural, where once safety meetings were rushed and box-checked, they became moments of dialogue. Where once ideas flowed only downward, they now rose upward too. One story from a secondary site made headlines when a 19-year-old apprentice flagged a flaw in an elevator shaft alignment using a 3D level app on his phone. A site supervisor dismissed him. The apprentice filed a Voice from the Ground report. Within 3 hours, Thomas himself called the site. The elevator shaft had to be adjusted, but more importantly, the 19-year-old was invited to HQ. He now works on Eaglestone's tech integration team. Back online, new hashtags began to rise. Every voice matters, Jamal taught use. From cement to CEO. It became more than a story. It became a symbol. Thomas had done more than rebuild a company. He had cracked open an industry, exposing not just technical weakness but human fragility, and then showed the world how to shore it up. The silence in the cabin was suffocating. Not the quiet of peace, but the oppressive quiet that fills a space when the truth is tiptoeing closer. Inch by inch, Derek Carter sat with his seat slightly reclined. The meal tray cleared away, his gaze locked on the emergency lighting strip along the aisle. Calm, still waiting. Across the aisle, Claudia adjusted her scarf, nervously glancing toward the galley where the flight attendants had gathered, whispering behind semi-closed curtains. The air was thicker now, not because of altitude, but because something beneath the surface was shifting. Claudia could feel it. For reasons she couldn't name, her usual control felt like it was slipping. Grain by grain, 30 rows back, Harper Derrick's assistant was already in motion. Quietly tapping on her tablet, she activated the Orion Jet app, a proprietary control system linked to the airline's onboard data networks. From flight manifest records to crew interaction logs, it stored everything, including flagged behavioral incidents and HR violation tags hidden under confidential access levels. With a triple biometric unlock, she entered the cabin compliance interface. It took 3 seconds, and in that brief span, every crew complaint, passenger incident report, and service violation associated with Claudia Romero and the flight team began to download in encrypted format. The file name read Skylog, Flight 717 Crew, Conduct History, Priority Black. Meanwhile, back at the front, Claudia stiffened. The captain had sent a quiet message to her device. "We may have a company exec on board. Proceed cautiously." She frowned. No name, no seat number, just a vague warning. Claudia's eyes flicked to the man in 2A Derrick. Her gut twisted. That quiet man, that unbothered stillness, that confidence. She dismissed the feeling. "He's probably just another business-class fluke trying to act important," she whispered to herself. But behind her, Harper was sending files in real time to Orion Jet's internal audit hub, an equity division command, a department created after the company's recent wave of DEI scandals. Within 5 minutes, an alert appeared in the cockpit. Compliance violation logged. Active review required. Captain Morales tapped the screen. The name Derrick J. Carter popped up under the cross-reference check. His fingers paused, his eyes widened. That name, it wasn't just on the executive roster, it was circled in red on the company's founding document. The man sitting in 2A wasn't just a frequent flyer. He was the Derrick Carter founder CEO, majority shareholder Claudia. He said, over the crew channel, his voice low but urgent. "Stand by. You may have made a mistake, a very serious one." But Claudia didn't hear it. She was too busy micromanaging the wine selection for the passenger in 2B while ignoring Derrick's request for a blanket that never arrived. Her colleague Bridget walked by Derrick's seat, still cool and polite, but this time there was a subtle difference in her expression, the first sign of recognition. Or fear. Row 9, a young woman. Emily, who had observed everything from the moment Derrick boarded, opened her phone. She wasn't a regular passenger. She was a freelance investigative journalist who had been following systemic discrimination trends in luxury service sectors. What she saw that day was textbook, and she was filming a short 30-second clip, Claudia handing Derrick the wrong meal. Claudia laughing when another crew member corrected her. Claudia saying, "Well, some people just don't seem like they'd care for fine dining." The clip was already drafted. Emily wasn't sure who he was, but her instincts told her the man in 2A wasn't the one to mock. Meanwhile, back on the ground, Harper's upload hit 98%. At 100%, the system triggered a level 1 review override. The HR department, dormant due to weekend staffing, was automatically notified via priority alert. Screens in the operations center blinked red. Urgent, executive-level passenger misconduct investigation in progress. Inside the plane, nothing looked different, but everything was. Because behind Derrick Carter's serene posture, behind the window reflection that showed only clouds and sky, a tidal wave of quiet justice had already begun. The data was secure, the footage was backed up, and every name tied to those violations was time-stamped and confirmed. Derrick glanced down at his phone, a single notification. SkyPulse verification, complete. All logs archived, internal review en route. He closed the screen. No visible change in emotion. No sudden whir. Just a slow blink, and then he leaned back in his chair and calmly adjusted his cufflink. Meanwhile, Claudia was about to receive a message that would change everything. But not yet. Not until the plane touched down. Not until the meeting room was prepared. Not until silence had run its course. And then the system would speak. The plane cruised at 36,000 feet. But inside the cabin, the atmosphere was descending fast. While passengers casually flipped through magazines or dozed off beneath the facade of a routine flight, the airline's internal defense system, SkyPulse, was unraveling the truth. Derrick Carter's expression remained unreadable, but his silence was working harder than any confrontation could. In a conference room 3,000 miles away, an alert pinged on the desk of Miriam Cho, Director of Internal Compliance for Orion Jet. She had seen her share of complaints, whistleblower cases, HR disputes, customer incidents, but this alert was different. It came from a flagged executive flight was marked Tier 1 Emergency Review, and it originated directly from Harper Stanton, the CEO's confidential assistant. Her fingers froze mid-keystroke. Opening the packet, Miriam's eyes darted through metadata, timestamps, seat assignments, internal notes, and personnel, conduct logs. And then came the name Claudia Romero, flight lead. Alongside it, a list 9 prior complaints, 7 dismissed, 2 settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements. The patterns weren't just troubling, they were systemic. Multiple entries included similar phrasing, demeaning selective service, rude to passengers of color, mock dietary requests told black male passenger, maybe economy's more your style. Worse still, every entry was tied to flights with senior executives, high-paying minority passengers or whistleblowers. Miriam leaned back in her chair. Her mind raced. She tapped into CrewMatch, the company's AI-based behavior trend tracker. Claudia's crew interactions revealed an alarming trend. Over 65% of incidents flagged for investigation involved Claudia or her hand-picked second-in-command, Bridget Sanders. She switched tabs to view Harper's encrypted dispatch. It included footage, no narration, just still camera audio from an eyewitness. Emily's footage synced to Harper's log. Claudia's tone was unmistakable. Some people don't look like they'd care for fine dining anyway. Just give him the meat tray. He looks like he could use it. He's dressed like someone who builds airplanes, not someone who rides them. None of it was technically loud. None of it screamed, but all of it was steeped in something far worse. Quiet institutional prejudice delivered with a polished smile. Miriam's fingers trembled slightly as she paged through the compiled audit files. The HR department hadn't just failed. It had protected. Back on the plane, Claudia's composure was beginning to slip. Bridget had just come from the cockpit, her expression hollow. She handed Claudia her phone discreetly. You need to read this. It was a message from the captain. Passenger 2A is Derek Carter confirmed. Do not engage further. Await instructions. Compliance has been alerted. The blood drained from Claudia's face. She didn't blink. Her mouth opened slightly, and for a moment her posture collapsed. Bridget took a half step back. What does that mean? She whispered. Claudia didn't respond. Her hands were already shaking. She had mocked him, denied his meal, smirked when he asked for service. She treated him like he didn't belong, because in her mind he didn't. Meanwhile, Derek remained silent. He had seen this play out too many times before, in boardrooms, in hotels on tarmacs. The only difference this time was that the data system worked in real time, and Harper had deployed it like a scalpel. In the lower deck, the aircraft's Service Network Core, SNC, the hub that logged crew device messages, passenger interactions, and even internal Wi-Fi search terms, was pinging anomalies. Harper's app had accessed everything. Claudia's crew chat logs, comments between her and Bridget, even her previous night's message to her colleague, ugh. Got a sign in the diversity route again. Got a smile extra fake this time. Harper had archived it all. And at that very moment in the Orion Jet headquarters, Miriam was on a secure Zoom call with General Counsel, the VP of Ethics, and the Chief Operating Officer. Derek hadn't even needed to call them. Harper's signal was enough. The COO's face was flushed. This is more than a complaint. Yes, Miriam said grimly. This is a case study in unchecked bio, and it's all caught on internal comms and surveillance. We can't let it go public. It won't need to, Miriam replied. Derek will handle it, but not like before. This time he's watching the fallout from the front row. Claudia sat down in the jump seat near the galley, staring forward. Her face had gone pale, she whispered. He didn't say a word. Not once. Why didn't he say anything? Bridget didn't answer because the silence was never weakness. It was a countdown. A quiet signal that the system was finally awake. By now, wordless tension blanketed the cabin like pressurized fog. The flight attendants moved with the mechanical stiffness of marionettes. Each step shadowed by the weight of a secret that had not yet fully broken the surface. Claudia, visibly shaken, tried to compose herself in the galley. Bridget was pacing softly. Neither dared look back toward row 2A. Derek Carter sat motionless, his gaze fixed out the window. The wisps of cirrus clouds outside drifted past like slow-moving thoughts. Soft, deceptive, fleeting. Behind his stillness, his mind was calculating not just the personal insult, but the pattern, the silence it was built on, and the system that permitted it to flourish. The evidence was now complete. The data had synced. Harper's quiet operation had turned the plane into a sealed exhibit of accountability. 2 rows behind him, a middle-aged couple whispered to each other. "Do you notice how nervous the crew seems?" the woman asked, stirring her coffee. "They're barely looking anyone in the eye." The man shrugged. Probably turbulence coming, but it wasn't. The turbulence was already here, just not outside. It started subtly. The older man in row 5, who had earlier chuckled at Claudia's offhand remark about preferred meals, now looked uneasily toward the front. He had noticed the silence too, the eerie stillness of a first-class cabin where service had suddenly flatlined. No refills, no dessert carts, no idle banter. Across the aisle, a tech executive named Jordan Mays quietly took out his phone. As a platinum-tier flyer, he had flown enough to detect the subtle shifts in cabin tone. He saw Claudia frozen in the galley. He saw Bridget whispering into the handset. He noticed the tense exchange of glances between crew. He looked at Derek, seated perfectly upright, hands gently folded, not moving. Something had happened, and it wasn't over. In the back galley, Bridget finally asked, "Should we just apologize? Offer another meal? Try to explain?" Claudia gripped the edge of the counter. "No, we say nothing. If we go to him now, it'll only confirm it. It already is confirmed, Claudia," Bridget said quietly. "It's just not loud yet." Meanwhile, Derek's tablet buzzed softly on his tray table. It was a secure ping from Harper's level. "One confirmation complete. Legal has flagged all prior violations. Internal is already preparing a report for you to sign off post-landing." He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply tapped once and placed the device back on the table. From the back of the cabin, Emily, the freelance journalist and unintentional witness, had begun quietly reviewing her footage. She hadn't planned to get involved. She wasn't even on assignment. But when Claudia's tone shifted earlier, when she sneered while offering Derek the bread and water combo, Emily instinctively began recording. Now in full playback, it was even worse than she remembered, not because of what was said, but because of how normalized it had been. No one intervened. No other flight attendant had stepped in. Even the passengers had laughed or looked away. Until now, as the air grew heavier with anticipation, a young black man in row 6 took off his headphones. He leaned toward his companion and whispered, "That guy up front. He's someone." His friend looked up. "What do you mean I don't know yet?" But he didn't flinch once when they were mocking him. "That's not fear, that's control." And then it happened. The captain's voice came over the speaker, cool, professional, but there was a slight tension behind his words. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be beginning our descent in about 25 minutes. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. And for the record, we'd like to thank all passengers for their cooperation and professionalism during today's flight." It was an odd statement. No turbulence, no incident. Why use those words? Derek Carter knew why. The captain knew who he was now. And in 25 minutes, the moment of accountability would no longer be hypothetical. From her seat, Claudia overheard the announcement. She grabbed Bridget's wrist. "They're preparing something. We're being watched." "We've always been watched, Claudia. We just thought the people watching didn't matter." Claudia's face crumpled slightly. "He's not going to say anything, is he?" "No," Bridget whispered. "He already said everything." With silence, meanwhile, Derek adjusted his watch. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, the crew preparing for landing procedures. But within the low hum of engines, a louder awareness took hold. The kind that travels without noise, carried in glances, in posture, in sudden realization. The man in 2A wasn't just a passenger. He was the pivot. And in a few minutes, the ground crew wouldn't just be welcoming Flight 417, they'd be meeting the reckoning it carried. As the plane began its final descent, landing gear humming beneath the fuselage, a quiet tremor of anticipation rippled through the cabin. It wasn't turbulence, it was something far deeper. Like a collective intuition among the passengers that whatever had been invisible before was about to become undeniable. In row 2A, Derek Carter unbuckled his seatbelt, not in panic, not out of urgency, but with surgical calm. He stood, smoothed his charcoal blazer, and turned facing the aisle. A flight attendant near the front cabin jolted slightly at the unexpected movement. "Sir, we're just moments from landing. Please take your seat." Derek nodded, but instead of sitting, he spoke with a voice that carried not in volume but in gravity. "I'll sit, but I believe the passengers around me deserve to know what's happening." Not out of drama, out of clarity, Claudia appeared from the galley, visibly trying to control her expression. "Sir, this isn't protocol. That's correct, Derek said without blinking. But neither is serving discriminatory meals, recording a black passenger without consent, or mocking him to his face in first class. The words landed with precision. A man in row 3 gasped softly. Emily pressed record again on her phone. Someone in row 6 muttered, "It's real. I knew it." I remained silent. Derek continued while being handed a dry roll and a room temperature plastic bottle. I remained silent when my tray table was cleared before everyone else's. I remained silent when laughter echoed behind me, triggered not by anything funny, but by the assumption that I didn't belong. Bridget took a cautious step forward. "Mr. Carter, I'm speaking," he said, not cruelly, but with the power of someone no longer willing to let silence be confused with surrender. Claudia stiffened. "You assumed," Derek said now, addressing the cabin, "that I was just another passenger, lucky enough to afford a first-class ticket. But luck had nothing to do with it." Now nearly every eye was turned toward him. The flight crew froze. The passengers, once passive, once complicit, were beginning to awaken. "I am Derek Isaiah Carter," he said, reaching into his breast pocket and producing a slim black card. "Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Capital Holdings, and effective immediately. This aircraft, its crew, and its operating procedures are under executive compliance review." Dead silence. Then Bridget spoke again, her voice trembling, but this time with something closer to regret than resistance. I didn't know, Mr. Carter. I didn't realize." Derek turned, locking eyes with her. "That's the point. You didn't think you needed to." Claudia tried to reassert herself, her tone sharp. "We follow procedures, sir. If something was inadequate, you could have filed a formal complaint like everyone else." Derek's gaze didn't falter. "And how many of those complaints go unanswered? How many are buried beneath forms and bureaucracy designed to protect the airline, not its passengers?" Someone in the back whispered, "He's not wrong." Bridget looked at Claudia. "He's right." Derek continued, stepping into the aisle. "I don't want an apology. I want accountability, because this isn't about me being a CEO. This is about what would have happened had I not been one." He turned to the rest of the cabin. "Would anyone have believed me? Would any of you have stood up if I had said this treatment is wrong without a title behind my name?" A middle-aged woman nodded slowly. "I didn't say anything," she said, "but I knew something felt off." Derek looked toward her. That silence, that hesitation is what makes these systems stay in place. It's not always the loud voices of bigotry. It's the quiet ones who look away. Suddenly the intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said, his voice now noticeably less automated. "We have safely landed. Please remain seated until we reach the gate. Thank you for flying with us." The wheels bumped gently against the tarmac. The final descent had ended, but the reckoning had just begun. Claudia looked pale now, gripping the headrest in front of her. Derek finally sat down. But before he did, he looked to the side where a young girl no more than 11 had been watching silently from across the aisle with wide eyes. She mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded. Because sometimes a single voice, steady, deliberate, was enough to unmask an entire system, and in the shadows of the airport awaiting outside consequences, were waiting to disembark. The jet bridge connected with a mechanical groan. A soft ding signaled the unlocking of the main cabin door. But no one stood. No one reached for their luggage. It wasn't fear. It was awe. A lingering awareness that something beyond a simple flight had unfolded midair. Claudia's fingers trembled as she fumbled with the in-flight tablet. Her manicured nails tapped rapidly against the screen, pulling up the passenger manifest. She wasn't supposed to do this. Internal policy required official clearance to access full identity data on first-class passengers, especially when flagged as priority red. But she didn't care. She needed answers because what she'd just witnessed didn't make sense, Carter. "Derek, why?" She tapped. The file expanded. "Derek Isaiah Carter, founder, CEO, Meridian Capital Holdings, executive aviation clearance, level 4 net worth. Estimate, 4.2 billion shareholder Skybridge International Airlines, parent company." The color drained from Claudia's face as though the words themselves had slapped her. Shareholder parent company, level 4 clearance. That meant he wasn't just a CEO flying first class, he partially owned the airline. Bridget peeked over her shoulder and gasped, "Oh my God," Claudia's breath came shallow. He's not just rich, he's our boss." Emily, still holding her phone, caught every reaction. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a witness, an archivist. The story she had captured on video was no longer just a viral moment. It was evidence of a systemic fracture. A soft voice broke the mounting tension. He warned you. Everyone turned. It was the woman from row 6. Quiet composed her tone firm, but not accusatory. He gave you a chance to act like he mattered before you knew who he was. Claudia stiffened. It was a misunderstanding. Oh, the woman replied, eyes hardening. It was a revelation. Bridget took a step back, visibly shaken. We need to call HQ. Let them know he's on board. Maybe we can... Derek rose from his seat again, this time with finality. No, he said, cool as ever. No phone calls, no excuses, no scrambling for PR damage control. You had 6 hours in the air to figure out what kind of people you wanted to be. You chose. He reached into his inside jacket pocket again, this time pulling out a sleek black folder stamped with a silver seal. Skybridge International Internal Audit Division. You want transparency? Let's begin here. He turned to the rest of the cabin, raising the folder slightly so all could see. For the past 3 months, this airline has been under an executive-level audit due to rising complaints of racial bias and discriminatory service practices. I chose this route, this flight, in this seat, not for convenience, but for investigation. Whispers spread like sparks across dry timber. Derek continued opening the folder. This flight, 1447 RLAX to Atlanta, has received 17 flagged complaints in the past 9 weeks. 10 of those were classified as unresolved. 7 were marked no actionable evidence. He glanced up. Do you know what that means in plain language? It means people said something and your team did nothing. The tablet slipped from Claudia's hands, thudding onto the floor. Bridget looked like she might be sick. Derek stepped forward, the mood colder than any corporate boardroom. Today I was served a bread roll and tap water in first class, laughed at by uniformed professionals, filmed without consent, mocked in whispers, dismissed when I spoke. And all of that happened before I said a single word about who I was. Claudia attempted a defense. We didn't know. Exactly, Derek cut her off. You didn't know. And that's the problem, silence. He let it stretch, fill the cabin like cement, until even the humming of the air circulation system felt too loud. Emily finally spoke. People will see this. I have the footage, Derek nodded. Let them. He turned to Claudia and Bridget. I'll be filing a full report to the Skybridge Board of Directors, which I sit on. Your names are already attached to previous unresolved complaints. I suggest you speak with legal counsel before you speak to the media. A small beep sounded from his smartwatch. A message blinked. Security team ready at gate. Derek smiled not cruelly, but like someone who knew the arc of justice was at last beginning to bend. As he stepped forward, Claudia instinctively backed into the galley. This doesn't mean you can ruin our careers, she said, voice trembling. Derek paused, then with deliberate precision said the words that would ripple far beyond the aircraft. No, but your choices already did. The cabin door opened. Outside, a team in charcoal gray suits waited executive security and compliance auditors in coordinated formation. Derek adjusted his jacket, turned once to glance at the cabin, then walked off the plane with the poise of a man who had never needed permission to belong. As Derek's polished Oxfords touched the jet bridge's carpet, the silent protocol began. 2 men in tailored suits with silver pins on their lapels flanked him without speaking a word. They didn't need instructions. These weren't security guards. They were compliance officers from the Skybridge International Internal Investigations Unit. One discreetly nodded toward the exit gate, while the other tapped his earpiece. Inside the cabin, the chaos was just beginning. Claudia scrambled toward the intercom. We have a situation, urgent escalation required at gate 34, I repeat. Urgent escalation. Stand down, came a firm voice behind her. It wasn't Derek's. It was Vanessa Hill, Chief Compliance Officer of Skybridge, who had entered from the rear galley moments after the aircraft door opened. Her presence sent a shockwave down the aisle. Dressed in dark navy with a white blouse, clipboard in hand, and a badge lanyard that carried the weight of judgment, she exuded quiet authority. Bridget turned pale. I didn't know you were on board. That was the point, Vanessa replied without a flicker of expression. Today's flight was a shadow audit. And you failed, Claudia tried to find footing. Look, we've made mistakes, but this can be resolved internally. There's no need to make it a public scandal. Vanessa tilted her head like a prosecutor weighing a half-hearted alibi. You served water and a cold bread roll to a shareholder. Mocked him. Filmed him, lied. That's not a mistake. That's a culture. Claudia's lips parted, but no words came. She looked to Bridget for help, but Bridget had turned away, already shrinking into herself. But aside, Derek walked slowly across the boarding area, his phone lighting up with new notifications. Posts, mentions, messages. Someone from the cabin had already leaked the footage. Likely Emily. It didn't matter. He wasn't going to stop it. He wasn't interested in controlling the narrative anymore. He was going to expose it. "Sir," one of the compliance officers said softly, "Crisis PR is requesting a preliminary statement. They're drafting language to minimize shareholder panic." Derek stopped, turned. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried the frost of someone who'd been patient long enough. "Let them panic," the officer blinked. "Excuse me, you heard me?" Derek said. "Let the panic begin. The moment we start covering this up is the moment we become complicit." The officer said nothing. He simply nodded and made a note on his digital slate. Back on the aircraft, Vanessa opened the in-flight tablet Claudia had dropped. She entered a master override code. A new interface appeared. SkyPulse Admin. View. She tapped once. Cabin Incident Review. The internal logs populated immediately. Passenger service discrepancies. Beverage logs, timestamp service gaps. The digital breadcrumbs of systemic neglect. "There's more than enough here," Vanessa murmured. Claudia whispered, "You don't have to escalate this. We can make amends." Vanessa looked up, her gaze cutting sharper than any raised voice could. "You want to make amends? Then own what you did. Not because you got caught, but because it was wrong." In the corridor, Derek paused at a window overlooking the tarmac. His reflection looked back at him. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, not even the man from the cabin, but the boy who used to clean airplane seats at Newark Liberty as a teen, who once wore the same polyester uniform and got yelled at for folding the napkins too precisely. That boy never forgot. He made a call. "Harper," he said to his assistant, "set up a board emergency session within the hour. Include legal, PR, HR, and diversity compliance full quorum. Understood. Topic, Flight 1347. A pause. "Are we burying it or broadcasting it?" Derek's voice was steel. "We're putting it on every screen at headquarters. Every employee, mandatory viewing." Back inside, Claudia was in free fall. "Please, my record." Vanessa didn't even blink. "Claudia, your record is precisely what got us here. Dozens of anonymous complaints, 3 formal warnings, and now footage." Claudia's shoulders sagged. "I'll be blacklisted," she muttered. "No." Vanessa said, cold but not cruel. "You'll be held accountable." "That's not the same thing." Outside, Derek entered a private elevator flanked by security. 1 floor up, the Executive Aviation Conference Lounge. He stepped inside. The room fell silent. 10 men and women in suits turned to him. The chairman of Skybridge, Leonard Barris, rose from his seat, clearing his throat. "Derek," he began. "We're just hearing about what happened." Derek raised a hand. "You're not just hearing about it," he said. "You've been hearing about it for months. Emails, complaints, surveys. You knew. You all knew." The room bristled. He dropped the SkyPulse folder on the table. "I've read every unresolved complaint personally, and I decided to become one of them, to feel what they feel. And you know what I learned?" No one answered. He opened the folder, pulled out a document, that it wasn't just about me. It never was. This is about culture, arrogance, entitlement. And today that culture ends. He placed his Skybridge shareholder badge on the table, then added his CEO credentials of the aviation division. "I'm assuming emergency operational authority under Clause 14B, effective immediately." Eyes widened. "You don't have the board's full vote." "I don't need it," Derek said. "The bylaws changed last quarter." "You signed them." He walked to the head of the table. "This isn't damage control. This is demolition, and we rebuild from here." Silence, utter, immovable silence. And in that silence, a new kind of foundation was being laid, one not made of PR scripts or reactionary statements, but of systemic truth. While Derek dismantled the old power structure upstairs, the remnants of it were quietly conspiring in the lower levels of the terminal. In a restricted access room labeled Crew Operations, authorized personnel, only the cabin crew led by Claudia and Bridget had gathered without permission. The fluorescent lighting flickered above, casting a harsh, sterile glow on the anxious faces within. Bridget stood near the whiteboard. Arms folded, her name badge now removed. Claudia paced in front of the group, her heels tapping with increasing frequency. "Okay," Claudia started. "We don't have time." Derek Thomas, Derek Carter just walked into the executive lounge and pulled rank. "We all saw it." Bridget's voice wavered. "He's not just a passenger, he's the CEO." "No, he's worse," Claudia snapped. He's the CEO pretending to be a passenger, which means every move we made, every misstep is now documented and we're being watched. A junior flight attendant, Melissa, barely out of training, raised her hand timidly. Are we going to be fired? Not if we get ahead of it, Claudia said. Her tone wasn't calming, it was desperate. She pulled out a USB stick and waved it in the air. This is the SkyPulse cache footage, audio logs, service entries. If we can overwrite the last 3 hours of data on the internal system before compliance locks it, we have a shot. Bridget's brow furrowed. That's tampering with federal aviation data. That's jail time. Not if we claim it was corrupted during a firmware update, Claudia replied sharply. We've done it before. Remember Flight 612? A few nodded uneasily. But this is different, Bridget muttered. This time, he was on the flight. Claudia exhaled heavily and glanced at the door. Then we move fast, before Vanessa escalates it to federal review. Melissa looked ill. I don't know about this. I joined Skybridge because of their ethics pledge. This doesn't feel right. Claudia turned, her voice softening into something darker. Threat laced as compassion. You've worked 3 flights. You make one mistake. You're gone. You think any other airline will hire you when your record says insubordination during compliance review. Melissa's eyes welled up. She looked down. It was a culture of fear, a silent, thick cloud choking any notion of dissent. But at that moment, the door opened, and Emily, the passenger who had first confronted Bridget in the air, stepped in wearing a Skybridge lanyard and holding a black case. Claudia's eyes narrowed. What the hell are you doing in here? I'm part of the internal journalism team, Emily said coolly. And as of 2 hours ago, by executive override, I've been assigned to the Skybridge cultural audit team. She opened the black case, revealing a recording device. Everything in this room is now being documented, and this meeting is unauthorized. Panic swept the room. You can't do this, Claudia barked. This is crew-only space, Emily raised an eyebrow. And you're using it to plot evidence destruction. Bridget took a step forward. Listen, we didn't mean to serve bread and water to the CEO, Emily said. Didn't mean to belittle a passenger for asking a question. Didn't mean to ignore 30 logged complaints in the last 3 quarters. She paused, then added, intent doesn't erase impact. The phrase hit like a gavel. The room stilled. Claudia, for the first time, looked cornered. Her voice cracked. You think you know what this job is? You sit behind your little media badge and think you understand what it's like up there, dealing with entitlement, abuse, racial profiling. You think this airline is fair. Emily didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. I think this airline is about to become fair, starting with accountability. Behind her, the door opened again. Vanessa Hill stepped in. I couldn't have said it better myself, she added. Every head turned. Vanessa's eyes scanned the group. She didn't yell. She didn't even glare. She simply held up a silver envelope. This is the preliminary suspension list. Every name here will be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Claudia stepped forward. You can't. I can, Vanessa said, her voice steel. I have CEO-level clearance for internal discipline under the SkyPulse equity clause. Melissa burst into tears. Bridget sat down, burying her face in her hands. Claudia stood frozen, watching her own authority dissolve before her. You had a choice, Vanessa said almost kindly. You could have told the truth. You could have apologized, and instead you tried to rewrite history. Claudia's lips trembled. He set us up. He tricked us. Vanessa raised a brow. No, he gave you the same service, the same seat, the same environment as everyone else. What you did with that was all on you. Emily stepped aside as Vanessa walked through the middle of the room, her heels echoing with the finality of a sentence already passed. Claudia looked at the USB stick in her hand. She dropped it. It hit the floor with a soft click. Insignificant, almost absurd. Vanessa didn't look back as she exited. Compliance will be in touch. And just like that, the meeting ended. Not with a plan, not with unity, but with silence. Not the kind that bonds people, but the kind that separates them forever. The tarmac simmered beneath the afternoon sun as the aircraft was wheeled into a private hangar reserved for high-priority security reviews. A silence loomed over the building, not born of vacancy, but of anticipation. Inside, the executive boardroom, hastily converted from a first-class lounge, had been cleared. No drinks, no soft jazz, no curated smiles, just order. And the man who now stood at its helm, Derek Carter. Gone was the navy hoodie he wore earlier in the day. In its place was a sharp charcoal suit, his Skybridge ID clipped in full view. The badge bore not just his name, but the two words that now held the weight of a tectonic shift in the room. Chief executives seated in front of him were 12 flight personnel, including Claudia, Bridget, and Melissa, now stripped of their previous composure. On the far wall, a flat screen displayed the words, Immediate Ethics Review, Flight SB-327. Behind Derek stood Vanessa Hill, Director of Internal Security, and Emily, now officially appointed as Equity Oversight Correspondent. Emily held a leather portfolio of documents. Vanessa held nothing. She didn't need to. Derek's voice was the first to break the stillness. I was offered a cappuccino this morning in the VIP lounge. His tone was calm, disarmingly so. On the flight, I was offered tap water and a slice of bread. No one dared respond. I requested a menu. I was ignored. I asked a question. I was told to stop thinking and start following. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I didn't name drop. I let the moment pass, but I recorded everything. He raised his wrist slightly, displaying his smartwatch. Flight SB-327 was equipped with SkyPulse Cabin Link, which you all agreed to in your contracts. Everything, your service logs, your voice commands, your movement tracking, is retrievable. So before we continue, I'm offering you a rare opportunity. He leaned forward, eyes moving slowly from one person to the next, to tell me the truth before the evidence does it for you. Bridget looked down. Claudia crossed her arms tight as armor. Melissa fidgeted with a tissue in her lap. Derek turned to Vanessa. Begin playback. The screen behind them came to life. Cabin footage showed the exact moment when Derek, in his casual attire, was told by Claudia, "You might be more comfortable near the galley, sir." The playback cut to the galley itself, where Bridget had told another attendant, "He looks like a voucher upgrade. No chance, he's platinum." Then came the meal service. Bridget to Claudia, "Just give him bread and water. If he complains, say we're out." And then Derek's request, "Excuse me, could I see the first-class menu?" Claudia's voice crisp and clear. "We're all out, maybe next time." The footage paused. Derek didn't say a word. He waited. Bridget finally spoke. "Sir, I mean Mr. Carter, we didn't mean to offend. It was a misunderstanding." Derek didn't blink. It was policy or prejudice. The room went still again. "I've flown this airline incognito 57 times in the past 2 years. I've been served with decency by people who had no idea who I was. I never intervened. But today, your decisions didn't just fail. Policy, they failed humanity." He turned toward Claudia. "Do you remember what you said to Melissa in the crew lounge?" Claudia hesitated. "I don't." Emily opened her folder. "If you don't help us delete this footage, you'll be jobless before your student loans start billing." Claudia froze. Derek didn't raise his voice. "Skybridge is not a company where we destroy evidence to protect egos." He turned to Vanessa. "Read the results of the flight audit." Vanessa pulled a single sheet from her folder. Claudia Winters, 6 prior complaints in 18 months, all related to discriminatory language or treatment. 3 were dismissed due to lack of internal corroboration. Bridget Sanders, 4 complaints, including one that flagged tampering with digital logs post-flight. Melissa Green, no complaints. 1 commendation for passenger empathy on flight SB-118. Melissa looked up in surprise. "You were the only one who asked if I needed anything when we hit turbulence," Derek said quietly. "You offered me a blanket, not because I'm your CEO, but because you're human." Melissa blinked back tears. Derek faced the group again. "Skybridge is a billion-dollar company. We can survive technical errors. We cannot survive moral rot." He paused, then turned to Vanessa. "I want final disciplinary actions drafted by tonight. Permanent dismissal for any personnel found to have committed ethical violations. Melissa Green will be transferred to the Director's Mentorship Program, effective immediately." Claudia stood up. "You're ruining my entire career over one mistake." Derek's voice dropped to a near whisper. "This wasn't one mistake. It was your standard operating behavior. And if I hadn't worn a suit yesterday, you would have done it again tomorrow." Claudia stepped back, her mouth open, but no words came. Derek looked around the room one final time. In 24 hours, the flight log and cabin footage will be released internally as part of Skybridge's Ethics Reset initiative. The days of immunity by position are over. And with that, he walked out, leaving behind a room no longer full of crew, but of consequences. As the heavy conference room doors closed behind Derek, the echo of his last sentence seemed to reverberate through the hangar like a tectonic tremor. The crew inside remained frozen in their chairs, Claudia staring at the floor in stunned silence. Bridget biting her nail as if to peel away guilt, and Melissa still unmoving, her eyes wide with disbelief at her unexpected promotion. Outside, the private hangar buzzed not with engines but with murmurs. By the time Derek entered the adjoining operations wing, a small media team summoned confidentially by Emily and Vanessa had already set up a live stream under embargo. This wasn't for ratings. It was for documentation, for transparency, for history. Vanessa adjusted her earpiece. Legal confirmed the internal release is greenlit. By 5 p.m., every Skybridge staff member, gate agents, pilots call center reps will receive a secure link to view the entire ethics review. Derek nodded. Good. Make sure it's not just a video. I want an accompanying letter from me, signed, dated, personal. He took a seat in the glass-paneled war room, the executive suite that overlooked the tarmac, now appropriated as a temporary command post. From here, Derek had a clear view of the aircraft that had carried him not just across cities, but into the rot of his company's soul. Any word from the union rep, he asked. Emily pulled up a message on her tablet. They're asking for a closed-door meeting. They want to understand the rationale behind your public dismissal of Claudia and Bridget. Derek exhaled slowly. They don't need to understand it. They need to see it. He stood again, walked toward the window, and placed one hand flat against the glass. You know the irony? Emily, he said, not looking at her. The technology we built to ensure flight, safety logs, sensors, voice capture, was never meant to be a courtroom. But when morality fails to show up in person, the tech becomes the witness. She nodded, and this time it spoke louder than anyone expected. Down below, a crowd had begun to form outside the security perimeter. Word had spread. Some employees had seen the footage, some had only heard rumors, but many were gathering not to protest or defend, but to watch, to see what accountability looked like when wielded by the highest power in the organization. It was around 3:45 p.m. when a Skybridge cargo van pulled into the hangar carrying laminated briefing folders, audit summaries, and updated employee rights posters, the kind that usually hung in break rooms unnoticed. Not this time, Derek gathered his senior staff. We're implementing phase 1 of Skybridge Reset. Effective immediately. All internal ethics claims will bypass direct management and go straight to the Central Justice Evaluation Unit. Anonymous or signed, doesn't matter. A hand went up. It was Leanne Yu, Deputy Director of Cabin Services. And what about historical claims? Past incidents that were never escalated. Derek didn't blink. We're reopening them. The room stirred. No one had expected retroactive justice, but that was the point. Let me be clear, Derek continued. Skybridge doesn't just have a discrimination problem. We have a culture problem, a systemic problem. And if we don't rebuild from the ground up, we're going to become the cautionary tale in tomorrow's Harvard Business Review. Silence, then slow nods. By 4:15 p.m., emails began hitting employee inboxes across the world. New York, San Francisco, Johannesburg, Dubai, Singapore. Subject line: Ethics Reset. A message from Derek Carter. Inside was a letter stripped of corporate fluff. No jargon, no PR polish. Today we uncovered a rot buried deep in our skies. And it didn't start in first class or economy. It started in the spaces where silence was rewarded and disrespect was overlooked. I was served a meal of bread and water today. Not because of shortage, not because of error, but because someone looked at me and saw less. That ends now. Almost instantly, bread is not service began trending on Threads and LinkedIn. Employees responded, some anonymously, some publicly. Testimonials poured in, gate agents overlooked for promotion. Ground crew facing bias from supervisors. Call center workers being muted in meetings despite seniority. And for every story, there was one consistent reaction. Finally, someone's listening. Inside the media tent, outside the hangar, Emily addressed a handful of internal communications officers. This isn't just a PR cleanup. This is cultural triage. And if anyone here still thinks Derek's move today was performative, you're not fit for what comes next, one officer raised a hand. So what does come next? Emily smiled tightly. Reconstruction, brick by brick, policy by policy, person by person, by 4:40 p.m. Derek returned to the boardroom one final time that day. Not for more footage, not for press, but to speak directly to the remaining executive leadership team. There's a reason I didn't fire everyone today. He began, his voice lower than usual, steady as steel under tension. Because this isn't about me being right. It's about this organization learning how to listen when it's wrong. He scanned the room. If we only punish individuals, the system survives. But if we change the structure, the silence dies, and I intend to make this place very, very loud with accountability. No one dared argue. Outside, the first-class aircraft still sat idle. But inside Skybridge, everything had already taken flight toward a truth that couldn't be ignored, and a justice that no longer needed permission. By the time the sun began to dip below the skyline and bathe the hangar in golden light, Derek Carter stepped out onto the tarmac. Not as a CEO cloaked in prestige, but as a man standing in the eye of a cultural storm. Across from him, a sea of employees had gathered: pilots, mechanics, cabin crew, janitorial staff, dispatchers, even food service vendors from the supplier chain. Word had traveled faster than even the Skybridge fleet could fly. This wasn't an organized rally. No HR emails had summoned them. They had come for the same reason flocks migrate: by instinct. Something seismic had shifted. At exactly 5:00 p.m., Derek took the small staircase that led to a temporary platform. No microphone, no teleprompter, just a man and the weight of 17,000 employees' unspoken questions hanging in the warm dusk air. He stood still for a moment, then he spoke. "I don't want your applause. I want your anger." A collective stillness. Eyebrows raised. Murmurs flickered like sparks. Because if you're not angry about what we all allowed to grow in this company, you're not paying attention. He let the words settle like dust over a just-landed jet. "I was served bread and water in first class this morning," he continued. "Not because we ran out of meals, but because someone in uniform believed I wasn't the kind of person worth serving." There were no gasps, just tightened jaws, lowered gazes, silent nods from those who understood far too well. And I know he said that for every story like mine, there are hundreds more you've buried inside you, because it felt safer to stay silent than to speak. I know you've stayed quiet, not because you lack courage, but because the system made you feel replaceable. In the crowd, a Blackgate agent from Atlanta, her face partially shaded by a navy blue cap, wiped a tear with the back of her hand. Derek stepped forward. "Starting today, that ends." Behind him, a projector screen lit up. Not a presentation, but names: dozens, then hundreds. Names of former employees who had left the company over the past 10 years after filing internal complaints, many of which had never been investigated. Emily's voice came over a portable PA. "These are the names we recovered from the archived claims vault. 82% of them were women or people of color. 97% left with no follow-up." Gasp, no. "I'm not showing this to shame the company." Derek said, "I'm showing this to bury the culture that created it." He pointed to a bolded line at the top of the list. "Claim 1 dismissed without explanation." A silence fell again. Then Derek turned back to the crowd. "As of this moment, we are launching a program that has never existed in any airline before. The listening cabin." A few confused looks, others leaned in. "It will be an independent tribunal, staffed not by HR, but by third-party ethics investigators, social psychologists, and legal ombudsmen. Every Skybridge employee, past or present, will have the opportunity to resubmit their complaint, anonymous if needed, public if chosen. No retaliation, no hierarchy." Murmurs of disbelief turned to quiet applause. "And for those who wonder why I'm doing this now, why after years of being CEO, I'll answer plainly: because I too stayed silent when I shouldn't have." He looked out at the crowd. "I knew about Claudia, about Bridget. There were reports, whispers. But I let convenience cloud consequence. I let quarterly performance outweigh cultural safety. And for that, I failed you." The applause stopped. The silence wasn't judgment. It was shock at a confession never expected from a man in his position. "But silence no longer protects power," Derek added. "It reveals it." The screen shifted again, this time to a new symbol. A pair of wings made from two hands, one raised in objection, the other outstretched in support. Beneath it, the program's motto: "Speak, be heard. Fly forward." Then came a voice from the crowd. It was low but clear. "I once reported a pilot who kept misgendering me on every flight." All eyes turned. It was a non-binary flight attendant in their early 20s, standing straight in their Navy uniform, eyes steady. He said, "It was just a joke. I filed a report, never heard back." Another voice, this time from a mechanic near the front. "I told my supervisor about racial slurs in the break room. He told me to develop thicker skin." More followed one by one, like raindrops before the flood. "I was denied a promotion 3 times. They said I didn't fit the image." My accent was mocked during safety announcements. They told me smiling would make passengers feel less nervous. Derek didn't interrupt. He listened. He did what no CEO before him had done in a Skybridge uniformed crowd. He let them speak, then he said just one sentence. Every single one of those stories is a system failure, and from this day forward, this system is being rebuilt to serve you. Thunderous applause followed not because the problems were solved, but because for once, they were acknowledged aloud by the man at the top. In the back of the crowd, Vanessa watched with folded arms and a quiet smile. Beside her, Emily whispered, "We're not building an airline. We're building a new sky. The camera crews now live captured every moment." But Derek didn't speak to them. He spoke only to the employees. "Tomorrow we begin issuing apology letters, not legal ones. Human ones hand-signed by every department head. If they refuse, they don't stay." The crowd reacted not with cheers but resolve, heads lifted, shoulders straightened. It wasn't just a speech. It was a reckoning, and it was only the beginning. A week after the tarmac reckoning, Skybridge Airlines was no longer the same company. Not in name, not in culture, not in silence. Inside a sunlit boardroom on the 30th floor of the Skybridge Executive Tower, Derek Carter stood before the company's new vision wall. Gone were the generic motivational posters and stock photo landscapes. In their place, a framed photo of a bread and water meal encased in glass. Below it, a steel plaque read, "This was never about food, it was about respect." Derek turned to the 12 newly appointed members of the Skybridge Equity and Ethics Council, employees from every department, from flight attendants to ramp agents. Not a single executive among them. They were not there to report, they were there to vote. "We're not here to write a policy," Derek said. "We're here to change the altitude of this company's soul." The room was quiet. Then a vote passed unanimously. The listening cabin program would be permanently integrated into onboarding, training, and review processes. Every story submitted, validated or not, would receive a written response. Every manager would be evaluated not only by performance metrics, but by anonymous ethical conduct reports from staff. It was no longer a company with a DEI office. It was a company where dignity itself was embedded into the flight manual. Later that evening, Derek returned to his private office. He opened a handwritten letter mailed weeks ago. It had arrived anonymously the day after the infamous first-class incident. He hadn't read it then. He wasn't ready. Now he was. The letter read, "Dear Skybridge, I watched a man be handed bread and water while others sipped champagne. I watched the crew laugh it off. And I watched that man say nothing, not because he couldn't, but because he measured the weight of his words like they carried wings. I'm writing not to file a complaint, but to thank that man, because that silence, it changed me." TH7B, Derek folded the letter, tucked it into his journal, and closed his eyes. That moment of humiliation had become the catalyst for transformation, not just for him, but for the entire company. Across the building, crews were installing a new exhibit in the main lobby, the Sky of Voices installation. It was a towering sculpture of dozens of metal feathers, each engraved with words from past employees who had once spoken up and been ignored. Emily's quote was the largest, curved across the top like a halo. "We don't fly higher by silencing the cabin. We fly higher by listening to it." Visitors stopped. Some stood in awe, others cried. A retired flight engineer whispered, "I never thought I'd live to see this." Meanwhile, in the Skybridge Tech Lab, Harper oversaw the final testing of the Cabin Echo app, a whistleblower platform with end-to-end encryption built not by contractors, but by a team of internal engineers who had themselves once been overlooked. The interface was sleek, intuitive, and most importantly, anonymous. The app's mission: let every employee speak. Let every concern land. Across Skybridge's network of 150 airports, rollout began immediately. Pilots received new training modules on unconscious bias. Ground crews were equipped with QR-coded ethical handbooks. New hire orientation began with a simple message: you are not a number. You are not an expendable role. You are a voice, use it. And the ripple effects didn't stop with Skybridge media outlets picked up the story. Bread is not service trended for 72 hours. Other airlines took notice. At a civil aviation summit in Geneva, Derek Carter gave a keynote titled "The Cost of Silence" at 35,000 feet. He didn't talk about net profits. He talked about Emily, about bread, about every ignored report. Back home, Claudia and Bridget, once the symbols of the old culture, were now cautionary tales in HR textbooks. 1 month later, in an open courtyard at the headquarters, Derek stood beside Vanessa and Harper as the company unveiled its final Reform the Humanity Clause, a new corporate amendment that would make it possible to fire any executive, regardless of tenure or performance, for repeated acts of discrimination, microaggressions, or retaliation. No legal loopholes, no golden parachutes. At the ceremony, a young woman approached Derek quietly. She looked nervous, holding her employee badge tight. I'm just a cleaner on the night shift, she said. But last year when I tried to report an incident with a pilot, no one even let me finish. Derek knelt slightly, not to lower himself, but to meet her eyes. You're not just anything, he said. What happened, she told him. For the first time, and for the first time, someone took notes, not out of obligation, but out of respect. And that Derek knew was the true legacy, not the policies, not the software, not even the viral headlines. It was the day when even the quietest voices were no longer echoes in the hall. They were the instruments that kept the vessel flying straight. As the sun set behind the Skybridge control tower, Derek stood once more before the entire company, gathered for the annual summit. I want to leave you with this, he said. Don't let anyone decide your worth by the seat you're in or the uniform you wear. He paused, because real altitude isn't measured in feet, it's measured in respect. Then he nodded. The final flight path had been laid, not in airspace, but in values. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.